So let's take a step back and say, what the heck is value and how do we generate it? And what role does data play in taking us there? Because as I said, data is simply one of the components, but it's a very key component. So if the data is poor, the value stream won't be successful, but the data by itself isn't sufficient. So that's what we have to sort of look at. So let's think about value streams for a second. Now, this kind of thinking comes from different kinds of business improvement concepts, things like lean management or different kinds of business modeling techniques to say, how do we connect the dots of different things to produce a result? Now, life is more complex than a single value stream shows, but it's a starting point, because really what we're talking about here is building a system of components that have to interact to drive results. So if we think about this for a second, and this is sort of generic, just a bunch of items here, but I'll show you an example of data in a second. Start to imagine that you have to assemble a recipe to produce value where data is a primary ingredient. What are the other components? And the other components, we're going to say, touch on people and processes and skills and policies. There's other things we have to get involved with here. So the impact is what I really want to produce. Now, impact is the result of using data in maybe a different or a novel way. But impact is something that changes in our company because we've done something. Impact is a change in a condition. And hopefully, if it's the impact in the right area, we value it. So we could say that a positive impact is an increase in value. Now, categories of impact, because we have to think there's different kinds of impacts we can produce. This goes back to thinking about how an organization makes money or is successful. And if we think about these, there's sort of 5 categories I've listed here, and just to think about the kinds of areas where impact happens. It could be around efficiency, effectiveness, quality, innovation, or agility. Now, what are these really talking about? Efficiency is an impact area where I do something better. I'm more productive. I do things with less cost. So I do more with less. So if I want to become to reduce cost or decrease times, I think about efficiency impacts. So the question is, where do I want to become more efficient? How can I do more work with less resources? What role can data play in getting me there? Now think about effectiveness for a second. What is effectiveness? Effectiveness is really the ability to produce the results you're looking for. In other words, it's knowing what work you should do to produce the results my company wants. So if you're efficient, you're just doing work better. If you're effective, you're doing the right work better. So you have to know, is the work I'm doing or the processes I'm carrying out leading to the results I want? So I might have to have data to measure that for me. Think about quality for a second. In this case, I'm talking about quality as really as a measure of consistency. And consistency usually has a link to efficiency, but it really means there's less waste produced, there's less rework having to be done, and usually quality leads to a happier customer. So quality is a measure of consistency and really, I guess, customer service or customer impact. Now, the last 2 here on this list are a little more novel. So when you think about being innovative or innovation impact, think about disrupting. Think about companies like the Ubers of the world or the Airbnbs of the world who have disrupted traditional businesses by using data as a way to drive new business models. So I'm talking about innovation here as a way of using data to drive new business models that maybe you can't even imagine what they are right now. Excuse me. Think about agility for a second. When I talk about agility here, I'm talking about the ability to respond to changing conditions in the marketplace or in the technology space more quickly than your competitors can. So agility is a measure of responsiveness and at an organizational level. So there may be other areas of impact, but I've given lots of thought to it, and I think these 5 categories do a pretty good job at covering the kinds of impact we could possibly create. Now, each of these categories can lead to different specific use cases. So the point of a value stream is to say, if value flows from left to right, requirements flow from right to left. So if I understand what impact I want to create, maybe it's delivering a product to a customer in less time with less cost. and that's an efficiency impact. So the requirement's working its way down through this value chain says, what do these various items to the left have to do to enable that impact? And one of these items is probably going to be the world of data. Now, once I understand what these requirements are, value will start to flow from left to right, assuming I have the right components in place. Now, if one of the items is missing or is working at a substandard level, then value can stop flowing, and I don't see the impact I'm looking for. So think about value streams as a way to understand how things across departments or organizational units must interact and work together to produce positive results. So this is a very generic view, and I'm going to show you an example in a second in terms of the world of data. So you can think of this as a system where items blend and combine together to enable the creation and flow of value. Before I move on to the next slide, there's one other property you can sort of think of. Because a value stream is really a form of a system, there's an interesting property within systems. And if you think about when you combine things and you blend things together, what you're doing here with these items in this value stream, there's a concept called the emergent property. And the emergent property is the magic that happens when you blend the right things together. And it's analogous to when, again, go back to the cooking analogy, when you make a great pot of chili or a great soup or a stew or a spaghetti sauce, the ingredients that go into that are probably commodity ingredients. And even individually, they may not taste good by themselves. But when you blend them together, there's a magic that happens that the flavor through that combination is incredible if it's a good pot of chili or spaghetti sauce, that isn't, the flavor isn't present in any one of the ingredients. And let me give you one other example about the emergent property, because this is really critical when you start to put governance into this discussion. If you think about an automobile as a piece of technology, and in today's world, cars can't drive by themselves, but maybe in the future they can, but that's not what I'm talking about here. Think about an automobile as a piece of technology, and by itself, it cannot move. Now, if you add a human component to it, you've now enabled the automobile plus the person to drive at highway speeds. So the person by themselves cannot, the car by itself cannot, together it can go at whatever highway speed you want to drive at. Now that's called the emergent property. That's the impact you can produce when you combine the right things. And that's what I'm talking about here when we start to blend and combine the right ingredients, which is through a value stream. Now, if I take this generic kind of discussion and I say, what does it mean if I talk about a data value stream? It means, how do I go from data to value? Because I said data by itself is an indirect link. So this is now, again, this is very simplified because this is just for the purposes of this webinar, but there's more components to it. But at a really simplistic level, we have an impact, and I said this is the impact I want to produce. So I said I talked earlier about efficiency, effectiveness, quality, etc. If these are one of the areas I want to produce, I might have a value stream per area. That is the true measure of value. So if I get an increase in some condition, how do I get that increase in condition? That's what the components in blue to the left of this are supposed to do. What are the requirements I have to make that impact possible? So the components in a data value stream are shown here, where we go from actions, decisions, analysis, and data. So I want to walk through these and have a discussion that data is critical here, but it's by no means enough. And so that's what I want to kind of go through the next kind of discussions here. So we said impact was the increase of some condition that I want to achieve. But the actions that lead to that are people doing work or some sort of an activity. It's a person making a sales call. It's a person making a product. It's a person hiring somebody else. It's a person shipping a product or pricing a product. So this is the actions we do. Now, when you think about the actions in companies, we can categorize those at different levels. And we have, excuse me, we can have strategic actions, tactical actions, and operational actions. And this is a way to get our heads around what types of data are we going to need to drive these actions. Strategic actions are really when we're starting to create a strategic vision or plan and setting goals and objectives for the organization. And it's really around setting the direction for the organization, what levels of profit or revenue or market share we're trying to pursue. That's a strategic direction and an objective. Now, the tactical work is what resources do we need to get there? If the strategy says we have to grow X% in this market, the tactical questions are what resources in terms of people, machines, equipment, office space, investments, what resources do we need to achieve our strategic intent? So tactical work, you could argue, is procurement, construction, hiring, seeking investments. It's all the work around acquiring resources so we can achieve our strategy. But operational work is all the work done to use the existing available resources we have. So we think about operational activities. It says, oh, you give me these resources. I got people, equipment, machines, vehicles, whatever I have, and now I can utilize these resources in a way to operate and execute towards the strategy. But when I'm operating, I have to deal with things like constraints and bottlenecks and delays and inefficiencies, and I have to ask myself, do I have the right resources available? Maybe I have too many or too few, and they're not allocated properly. So I start to think about the different kinds of actions we need to put in place that lead to the impact I'm trying to pursue. So that's this next piece of the value chain. The middle piece now is we're going to call is the decision box. And when we think about decisions should lead to the correct actions I want to take. Now, a decision, if you think about what decisions are really made of, it's looking at the options available to me. But how do I know how do I know what options I have? So looking at surely the options that are in front of me, what is the impact of different options, both intended or unintended consequences of my actions? What is the quality of my decision? Now, by quality, I mean how quickly, how much cost. Can I make this decision more timely, with less pondering and less delay? Can I make the decision more timely because it's more urgent? So I have a more informed, and I've reduced the risk of an inappropriate decision by considering options in a more timely fashion. Now, every decision has a risk associated with it. What is risk essentially? Risk is a measure of uncertainty. So if I can reduce the uncertainty of my decisions, how? Maybe through information, then I have a more confidence in taking what actions I should take. So if I can score my decisions or my options, I can decide then what action I should take that lead to the impact. So this is the decision box. And again, these decisions can be made at the level of work, which could be strategic, tactical, or operational. So strategic is what level of market share do I want to achieve? Tactically is who do I buy my resources from and at what price? And operationally is how do I schedule the work based on the resources I have to do? And that would then lead to the actions we want to take. Now, all of this is based on being informed. So the next box, we could have different labels here. I've called it analysis. It could be called analytics. It could be called information. I've done it to kind of simplify it here, only to say that this box is really the heart of where analytics, maybe artificial intelligence, and data science might fit today. Analysis is trying to generate the right information or insight we need to drive the decisions that will lead to the actions I want to take. So analysis is quite often starts with problem framing, understanding the area you're trying to make a decision around. What is the true objective of your decision? Do you understand your goal and objective? Do you understand the variables that'll drive the actions you want to lead? So you need information. Now, information, where does it come from? Well, eventually it's going to come from data on the left. We'll get to that in a second. But information is really the answer to a person's question. Now, who has these questions? Who are the skilled, literate people that have challenging, probing, tough questions? If you don't have good insight about the organization in the first place, you're not going to have very good questions. So analysis is heavily based on having people that are having the right skills and the knowledge and literacy to know what questions to ask so we can use data to drive answers, to drive decisions. So analysis is much more than technology. It's much more than algorithms. It's much more than, but they're important. So this is also where a lot of people have to have confidence, literacy, and experience to formulate questions that are more deeper and insightful than simply say, what happened? So we have to ask questions like, how do I improve this? Or what are my opportunities? And how can I drive change? And so we need to frame problems in a way they'll answer ways to improve the organization. So again, the analysis box here includes many components: how we ask questions, how we frame problems, what algorithms we build, what models we deploy, things around the quality of information, and the degree of integration we apply to the raw data. So we could frame questions as simple questions, which are fact-based, like what happened, when did it happen, etc. And we could have more advanced questions, which is more around how can I improve this, or what will happen if I do that. And so the kinds of questions we want to answer will drive the need for different kinds of data and different kinds of models and algorithms. But this is a very important box that understands how data will be applied to drive the work we want to do. Okay, now the piece we've been focusing on with data is the foundation of this value stream. So if we talk about data governance, and we've talked about that in isolation, we're simply talking about this first box in the chain. So data by itself, we know, has different kinds of properties. And data governance historically for the last decade and a half have been focusing on these individual kind of characteristics. So quality of data, my definition of data quality is, it's a relative term that if data is more useful to more people, it is of higher quality. Now, there are absolute conditions in data quality discussions like accuracy, completeness, and that kind of thing. We have to understand the requirements of my analysis for consistency, accuracy, and completeness. And I want to know if the data I have is useful enough for the analysis I want to do. So when I manage quality, I'm understanding what data can be used to answer what forms of questions, so I can then support the value chain. Security is all around protecting the privacy and regulations associated with data, so we minimize and avoid lawsuits and regulatory compliance issues. We have the challenge of making data more accessible. If the goal is to make data more useful to more people, how do people know it's there and how do they understand it? So the level of understanding is important from a governance point of view, because we have to make people aware and have the skills to find what they're looking for and not be confused by it or misinterpret it. The data needs to be sufficiently timely for the timeline of the value chain or value stream. So if something is at a strategic level, the timeliness is probably in the order of days to weeks to months, where the timeline on the operational value stream might be in the order of seconds to minutes to hours. So the timeliness is really important to know what level of analysis we're trying to carry out here. Is the data sufficiently available to the right people? Are we protecting ourselves from a compliance point of view and a privacy point of view that we only make data, the right data is available for the people who are authorized to see it? So that's a big issue. And is it compliant with all the regulations, both internal and external, that will drive the sufficient and acceptable use of that data? So if we think about this now, and we walk through this value stream, we see there's many pieces of a puzzle, and the pieces of the puzzle need to collectively work together, just like the components of your car have to work well together, or your car will not move very far.